Every February 2nd, a small ceremony takes place in the town of Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania. A crowd will gather to see if a hibernating rodent can see its shadow. The results of said shadow seeing are supposed to have implications for the long-term weather forecast. If all that sounds a bit absurd, you are not wrong. And then there's also something about a movie that really has nothing to do with groundhogs. Learn far more about Groundhog Day than you ever really needed to know on this episode of Everything Everywhere Daily. This episode is sponsored by Mint Mobile. Everybody knows someone who insists on doing things the hard way. There's a friend who keeps paying for a subscription they forgot they had, or the one refusing to update their phone just because it still works. Mint Mobile exists purely to fix that problem. You get the same coverage, same speed, just without the inflated price tag. That's why I recommend Mint Mobile. For a limited time, get 50% off 3, 6, or 12-month plans of unlimited premium wireless. Ready to stop paying more than you have to? New customers can make the switch today and for a limited time get unlimited premium wireless for just $15 a month. Switch now at mintmobile.com/EED. That's mintmobile.com/EED. Upfront payment of $45 for 3 months, $90 for 6 months, or $180 for 12-month plan required. $15 a month equivalent. Taxes and fees extra. Initial plan term only. Over 50 gigabytes may slow when network is busy. Capable device required. Availability, speed, and coverage varies. Additional terms apply. See mintmobile.com. This episode is sponsored by Quince. For months, I have been telling you about the high-quality products at great prices at Quince. But I want to share with you a recent experience I had with them. I recently purchased a new laptop bag from Quince. I ordered it online and waited for it to arrive, but it never showed up. It turns out the Postal Service lost it. Not Quince's fault, but I went to their website to report it. I was able to contact a live customer service agent via chat. They confirmed the issue and had a new bag sent to me immediately. The entire process took about a minute. No hoops to jump through and no waiting. Quince works directly with top factories and cuts out the middleman, so you're not paying for brand markup, just quality clothing. And they also happen to have amazing customer service. Refresh your wardrobe with Quince. Go to quince.com/daily for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. Now available in Canada too. That's QUINCE.com/daily. Free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/daily. I've done many episodes on holidays, and a common theme in a lot of them is that many of them are actually of ancient origin. But in the case of Groundhog Day, however, well, the origins are also ancient. The roots of Groundhog Day can trace back thousands of years to the festival of Imbolc, a Gaelic festival marking the midpoint between the winter solstice and spring equinox. Ancient Celts celebrated this time as the beginning of spring, observing natural signs to try and predict the remainder of winter. Imbolc has deep roots in pre-Christian Ireland and Scotland and is tied closely to the rhythms of pastoral life. The name is usually linked to Old Irish words associated with milk or purification, reflecting the time when ewes began to lactate, and the first signs of agricultural renewal appeared. For early farming communities, this was a crucial moment. Food stores were low, and the return of milk represented survival as much as hope. Imbolc is strongly associated with Brigid, one of the most important figures in Gaelic tradition. In her pre-Christian form, Brigid was a goddess of fire, healing, poetry, fertility, and smithcraft. These domains fit the festival of Imbolc perfectly. Fire represented warmth and protection in the late winter. Healing addressed the fragility of life at this time of year, and fertility pointed towards the coming growing season. Household rituals often centered on the hearth. Candles and fires were lit to welcome Brigid and to symbolically strengthen the returning sun. In some traditions, people prepared a place for Brigid to visit overnight, laying out cloth or rushes to receive her blessing. And so far, you will note that none of this has anything to do with groundhogs. When Christianity spread through Europe, this tradition merged with Candlemas Day, which was also celebrated on February 2nd, when the clergy blessed candles. a popular English saying emerged. Quote, "If Candlemas be fair and bright, winter has another flight. If Candlemas bring cloud and rain, winter will not come again." In Germany, this evolved into watching whether hibernating animals, particularly badgers, saw their shadow upon emerging. Still, not a groundhog, but we're getting closer. German immigrants, particularly the Pennsylvania Dutch who settled in Pennsylvania in the 18th and 19th centuries, brought this tradition to America. And the term Pennsylvania Dutch has nothing to do with people from the Netherlands, but rather people from Germany who were Deutsch, and the English kind of butchered the phrase. Finding no badgers, but plenty of groundhogs, also called woodchucks, they adapted the custom to the local conditions, and the groundhog became the weather prophet. And just as an aside, seeing that groundhogs are exactly the same thing as woodchucks, this raises an important question. How much ground could a groundhog hog if a groundhog could hog ground? The first official Groundhog Day celebration occurred in Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania on February 2nd, 1887. They declared the local groundhog, eventually named Punxsutawney Phil, to be the official weather forecaster. The event was inspired by editor Clymer Freyas, who convinced the group to make the trek to Gobbler's Knob. Gobbler's Knob is a wooden hilltop just outside of Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania, where the town's official Groundhog Day ceremony takes place every year on February 2nd. Despite the rustic name, Gobbler's Knob is not a natural landmark with any significance. It is a deliberately chosen ceremonial location that became central to the tradition in the mid-20th century. The site sits a short distance from downtown Punxsutawney and offers a forested backdrop that photographs well and can accommodate large crowds. And if you're curious as to why it's called Gobbler's Knob, in Pennsylvania, knob commonly refers to a small hill or rounded rise, and gobbler is a colloquial term for wild turkey. The name long predates its association with Groundhog Day. As for Punxsutawney Phil, according to the official legend, Phil is said to have been making predictions continuously since the first official observance in 1887, and is described as being well more than 130 years old. The explanation for the improbable longevity of this groundhog is folklore rather than biology. The Punxsutawney Grounding Club, specifically its inner circle, maintains that Punxsutawney Phil's long life is a result of a special groundhog punch, an elixir that grants him extended life or effective immortality. Each sip is said to add several years to his lifespan. The story is presented playfully yet consistently, and it's part of the event's ritual narrative. In practical biological terms, groundhogs live around 6 to 10 years in captivity. From a scientific perspective, many different groundhogs have almost certainly played the role over the decades. However, tradition treats them all as the same continuous character. When one animal is replaced, the identity of Punxsutawney Phil is considered to pass seamlessly to the next groundhog, kind of like a royal title or a theatrical role. For decades, Groundhog Day remained primarily a regional Pennsylvania tradition, though other communities developed their own versions. The celebration grew gradually through the 20th century, with expanding media coverage bringing it to national attention. So, is there any validity to the groundhog seeing its shadow? The short answer is no. The long answer is no, 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 no. Despite the fanfare, groundhogs are remarkably poor meteorologists. According to the Stormfast Almanac, which has tracked Phil's predictions, Punxsutawney Phil has only been correct about 40% of the time since 1887, which is worse than flipping a coin. The National Climatic Data Center analyzed Phil's predictions from 1988 to 2012 and found that he was accurate only 39% of the time. Likewise, Canadian meteorologists have similarly debunked their groundhog predictors, finding no correlation between the predictions and actual weather patterns. The prediction relies on whether the groundhog sees its shadow or doesn't, and this depends entirely on whether February 2nd is sunny or cloudy in a single location, and has no scientific relationship to broader weather patterns over the following 6 weeks. Now, you might have noticed that there's something I haven't yet mentioned, something which you probably thought of right away when I said the words Groundhog Day. And that would be the 1993 movie starring Bill Murray. I now want to take this episode in a completely different direction for two reasons. The first is that it's really hard to talk about the actual Groundhog Day for a full episode. And the second is that there's something else I really want an excuse to talk about, but otherwise would probably never get a chance to. If for some reason you aren't familiar with it, the movie Groundhog Day is a comedy in which Bill Murray plays Phil Connors, a cynical TV weatherman sent to cover the annual Groundhog Day ceremony in Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania. After the assignment, Phil finds himself trapped, reliving February 2nd over and over again, waking each morning to the same events in what seems like a perpetual time loop. At first, Phil uses the time loop for selfish pleasure and manipulation, then sinks deeper into despair when he realizes that he cannot escape it. Over time, he changes course using the endless repetition to improve himself, help others, and genuinely connect with the people around him, especially his producer, Rita. The loop finally breaks only after Phil becomes a better person, suggesting that personal growth, empathy, and responsibility are the real path to freedom. In the process of Phil breaking the loop, he becomes an expert in multiple skills. He learns to play the piano, speak French, play billiards, ice sculpt, and potentially much, much more. So the question that fans have been debating ever since the film came out is, how many days did Phil relive in the movie? The film never states how long Phil repeats February 2nd. And that's not an oversight. The ambiguity is intentional and thematically central. The movie is not about time mechanics, but about moral transformation. Still, the film provides enough internal evidence to bound the answer, and that's where analysis and fan theories have come in. Even using conservative assumptions, Phil is trapped far longer than weeks or months. Phil demonstrates mastery of multiple aforementioned complex skills that cannot be learned quickly, detailed knowledge of the daily movements and biographies of dozens of townspeople, and medical competence suffice to anticipate and respond to emergencies. Learning any one of these to the level shown on the screen would require years. Taken together, they establish a minimum time span that is comfortably measured in decades. Most serious analysis places an absolute lower bound at roughly 8 to 10 years, which is already aggressive given the assumption of highly optimized learning with unlimited daily repetition. Phil progresses from a complete beginner to performing Rachmaninoff publicly and confidently. Real-world piano learning suggests that reaching that level, even with daily practice, takes at least 8 to 10 years for a gifted adult learner. Importantly, Phil is not merely playing notes, he demonstrates musicality, phrasing, and confidence under performance conditions. Even allowing for perfect retention across loops and unlimited practice time each day, piano alone pushes the timescape into the decade range. Phil also produces detailed, expressive ice sculptures in public settings. Ice sculpting is not just a carving skill, but also spatial planning, tool mastery, and material intuition. Reaching that level would realistically take several years of focused practice. Phil speaks fluent, idiomatic French with accurate pronunciation and spontaneous comprehension. Adult fluency, especially without immersion in a French-speaking environment, generally requires multiple years. The fact that Phil likely learned it through books, recordings, and trial-and-error conversations suggests an even longer timeline. Phil memorizes intimate details about dozens of people in town, including names, schedules, personal histories, and preferences. And it's not just memory. It requires repeated observations across many different loops. Given the number of characters and the precision of his timing, this alone implies hundreds, if not thousands, of repetitions. Phil learns exactly when and how events such as choking, falls, and heart attacks occur and responds with appropriate interventions. While some actions are simple, the confidence and accuracy imply long familiarity and repeated failed attempts. Director Harold Ramis stated in interviews that he imagined Phil being trapped for around 10 years. And this is the most commonly cited semi-official answer. However, Ramis also acknowledged that this was more of a narrative intuition than a mathematical calculation, and that longer durations were entirely possible. Actor Bill Murray reportedly preferred a much longer interpretation, on the orders of decades or centuries, because it better matched the spiritual weight of Phil's transformation. Some fans argue that Phil's final demeanor reflects someone who has lived far longer than a normal human lifespan. His calm patience and deep empathy resemble a monastic approach to life rather than merely improved personality traits. This interpretation treats the loop as a form of purgatory or spiritual trial rather than a learning exercise. The upper estimates put the amount of time Phil spent in Groundhog Day at around 10,000 years. Crucially, Phil's loop doesn't end when he becomes skilled, successful, or admired. It ends when his goodness is no longer transactional. Phil helps people without expecting a reward, seduces no one, manipulates no outcomes for advantage, and accepts uncertainty. The day resolves not because it's perfect, but because Phil no longer needs control. The movie Groundhog Day often appears on the lists of the greatest comedies ever made, and just as often on lists of the greatest films of any genre. Critics routinely single it out as a rare comedy that improves with repeated viewing, with its structure inviting analysis rather than exhausting itself after the first watch. The term Groundhog Day has entered common usage among critics and scholars as a shorthand for time loop narratives and stories about repetition and entrapment. In summary, the movie Groundhog Day and the day that it's based on are both the result of a modern interpretation of an ancient Gaelic festival, which involves the absurd notion of predicting the weather based on a rodent's shadow.
Then put your little hand in mine. There ain't no hill or mountain we can't climb. Hey.
Every February 2nd, a small ceremony takes place in the town of Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania. A crowd will gather to see if a hibernating rodent can see its shadow. The results of said shadow seeing are supposed to have implications for the long-term weather forecast. If all that sounds a bit absurd, you are not wrong. And then there's also something about a movie that really has nothing to do with groundhogs. Learn far more about Groundhog Day than you ever really needed to know on this episode of Everything Everywhere Daily.